Okay, welcome to the introduction to the Horizontal Hostility Conference. In this talk, I'm going to present a little bit why we're doing this, why we think it's important now, what gave us the idea, what's behind it, personal as well as group reasons. And please do leave your comments in the Facebook group. And I need to check if this is actually working. We actually recorded before it hadn't worked. So yes, it's working. Great. Okay. So horizontal hostility is not a term that's familiar to a lot of people. We hope to make it much more familiar. It's actually got a lovely, very interesting history. It comes from a feminist movement, and we'll probably put some articles up about that if we find some good stuff. You can find all the information in this web and ecoinversion.net. So what is it? Well, we found this drawing that explained it very well, and basically it starts with this idea of the 1% and the 99%, which was popularized by the Occupy movement. Now we don't have a king necessarily, but there is a there is a material reality of very, very few people who have a lot of the economic power in our society. And in collective intelligence, in terms of integral permaculture and design, I would call it collective intelligence. It's also called solidarity. A culture of resistance would be, if there is solidarity with the 99%, then it's a cinch. There's a resistance, and we don't have to be oppressed by this power. We can integrate it and change society. But that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because of horizontal hostility, is what this picture says. And we want to explore this issue. Say, well, how important is it really? So in terms of design, I would also call it, if the other one is collective intelligence, this is also could be called collective stupidity, is when the 99% are fighting, are so busy fighting and wasting energy with each other, fighting each other, that they don't create any resistance. So the reason we've put it in Ecoinversion.net, which is basically a web that unites some conferences that we've been doing about ecoeconomics, is because it's actually, economics has to do with where we invest our energies, our time, our money, our resources. And this is very much to do with economics in this sense. And one of the big reasons for possibly that we haven't changed the economy, although we've known for a long time what's wrong with it, is because of horizontal hostility, because we waste our energies in these ways. So it's also, apart from collective stupidity, we could call it a massive misdirection of energy, time, and resources. And I'm going to be using some drawings by an artist that I like very much, who's a very irreverent anti-capitalist worker and a campaigner. And this is one of her drawings. So horizontal hostility is very much brought to you by capitalism. We're actually, if we look, we have some very interesting theories. There's articles about this in the article section, about how we actually bred to be horizontally hostile. And it is very much a historical virus, or set of viruses that have been implanted so that we don't create an effective resistance. So this is one of the things that we'll be looking at in this conference. The reason we've actually been a long time in creating this, about 6 months. We've been collecting interviews, and so some of the recorded things are interviews, others are more like talks, chats. And it was actually quite difficult to get it together because of personal issues. It's a difficult subject. It's not a pleasant subject to be talking about. So well done for being here, because there's definitely a lot in our culture about, oh, let's only talk about happy things and the bad things will go away. We wish. And I think just the thing about the 1st of November is that in Europe, in some countries in Europe, like here in Spain, it's the day of honoring the dead, and also All Saints Day. So in a way, we're doing both. because horizontal austerity kills. It certainly kills hopes and projects, and it kills people. I have some experience of this. I have three very close friends and colleagues that were killed by horizontal austerity. And so that's why it's a subject quite close to my heart. And that's why I thought today would be a really good time to start this conference. One is called Lucia. I actually knew we were very good friends since we were like 11. We lost touch a bit when we were older, but we were very close. And she actually taught me a lot about activism because she was a radical from age 13, a radical feminist from age 14. She was in anti-nuclear demonstrations, became a socialist, and she was a Trotskyist from very young. Anyway, she just fought, like, you know, for whatever she thought was right all her life. And then she was disabled, and that gave her a different perspective as well. It's usually the most oppressed people who can see the mechanics of oppression better than anybody else. So she taught me a lot about how to see the world in a different way, in a way that makes a lot more sense. And she suffered greatly for this. She was very outspoken, very brave from very young. She used to embarrass me, in fact, with her outspokenness. But I owe her a huge debt of gratitude. And she committed suicide 5 years ago, around this time actually. She was born on the 31st of October on Halloween. And she died a horrible death, in part because, well, all the stress of being this very controversial figure all her life, but also, you know, piling up with family problems and her husband dying and stuff like that. And just things got too much, and not having enough of a support system around her. And Maxine was another friend, also very radical, very outspoken, visionaries. I mean, both these people were visionaries in the sense that, you know, they had the ability, and they taught me how it is to see through the matrix. You know, there's matrix vision, that you can actually see the patterns behind things, the reality behind the shapes. And she was very controversial about it because she would speak her mind. She was an anti-racism campaigner. She was an anti-poverty campaigner. She was a feminist. She was very passionate about food justice. That's why I actually met her when I was in Green Adventure she worked on a box scheme. Again, taught me loads. And in the end, you know, the oppression got so much that it just built up and built up over many years. And she also committed suicide about 4 years ago. And the next one, the last person I know who's dead, but she didn't commit suicide, but she died of a very virulent cancer that, and they're all very young. They all died in the early 30s or mid 30s. And Nuria was quite different. She was also way ahead of her time, way ahead of most people around her. But unlike Lucia and Nuria, Polly changed her name to Lucia when she was older, Lucia and Maxine, who weren't popular. They were actually quite disliked by a lot of people because they were so controversial. And that's why I liked them, because I loved their bravery and I really admired. But Nuria was very popular. She was, you know, very beautiful, very friendly. She was an actress as well, but she was an empresario, a businesswoman, very intelligent, very successful. And in fact, a lot of the stuff that, you know, the horizontal austerity and how it affected her was through envy, I think. And then, you know, as soon as she decided that she would go into permaculture and organic growing, she was very successful very quickly at getting her business going. Then she had a farm, and loads of people came and visited her. And she had this attitude of service, you know, that she would have to service all these people who came to want to drink of her energy. You know, in the end, she was consumed, you know, literally. But, you know, the things, how they pile up, you know, this death by 1,000 cuts, you know, is lots of people wanting and taking things from her, but not really giving anything back or much back. Yeah. She would have loads of people come to see her project and then stay and have parties and then leave her all the work and leave her, you know. and not really help all that much. But in the end, it was also, family circumstances and a toxic relationship that saw the end of her. And I, from knowing all these people very intimately, I am very clear about the fact that it was horizontal hostility and oppression that killed them. In the end, it was all these things piling up. So horizontal hostility kills. If it doesn't kill people, if it doesn't kill like activists, what I've seen much more than actual people dying, these are just extreme examples, are people being discouraged, people like being completely turned off from doing social change work, because they've seen the hostility, they've seen the ugliness of people who are supposed to be our own colleagues turning on you and treating you like shit, especially if you're in a leadership position, especially if you've got initiative. So I'd like to encourage you to think and honor your own dead, and they don't necessarily need to be people. They can be hopes and projects that you started with a lot of hope and maybe they died, or that you've seen other people's project die, if you have any. If you don't, I hope you never will have any. And I hope we get rid of this virus quick enough so that we don't have to kill so many projects and connections. And also celebrating our heroes, our heroes and heroes, the people who have succeeded in moving things and changing things. There's always never enough, but there are wonderful people. And we can create a culture where these people are better supported so that we're all more likely to create the world that we want. And this is the opposite of horizontal hostility, is standing together and fighting as one. And so there are some good examples, like the stories of Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. Although, they sacrificed their lives, they sacrificed their freedom. Julian Assange is, threatened with being murdered, executed by, so he had to be in hiding. And Edward Snowden is, is also in a political refugee practically because of his work. So you can look these people up. I'm not going to go into the story. The interesting thing is these are activists, the same as these other women and some others that I mentioned, but they didn't have, they're popular. 99% of the people support them. Their oppression comes from governments and the authorities, because they are doing work that threatens the system. Other activists are doing exactly the same thing, that they're threatening the system in different ways, but the system doesn't need to oppress them because we're doing it for them. Okay, that's the difference. But these have had a lot of solidarity, and people have stood behind them, and that's why they're still alive, I think. And because a lot of people recognize that they're heroes. So fighting for justice requires solidarity. Okay, it requires that the people, it doesn't require all of us to be incredibly brave and heroic and risk our lives, but it does require that the people who do choose to take that work, or can do that work, have got support, and in all sorts of ways. So collective intelligence is created, solidarity is collective intelligence, and solidarity, they're cultural memes, they're a culture that we can create together. It's a way of thinking. And they're fractals. Memes are just like genes, but they're mental genes. They reproduce. So the mental memes of fear, of attacking each other, of putting each other down, they're just as infectious as memes of appreciation, of gratitude, of honoring and respecting these people, instead of feeling, like all sorts of other things we're pulled to feel. Like sometimes, like I said, with Nuria was very clear, but with some of these people, they're so brilliant that if we're not expressing our gifts and doing the lives that we're doing, we can end up feeling jealous and resentful of them without even realizing. So we find excuses to dislike them and to not support them and whatever. And that's horizontal hostility. It comes from a kind of emotional immaturity that's very much cultivated in our system because it serves it very well. It makes us separate. It makes us impossible to, to band together as one. I love like Stephanie McMillan's drawings. They're always like, different species, completely different creatures banding together. So this one's really powerful, I think. That we don't have to be equal to stay together. We can be very different, but stand together on issues that are important for us. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, learning from their experiences. Now, that's what we're doing in the conference. We've actually found some great, very experienced activists who've told us their stories. We asked them 2 or 3 stories of their own experience of hostility, of horizontal hostility, why they think it had happened. Okay, I love this drawing because it's like, it's also about, you know, there's this saying, we're going slowly because we're going far. That although there's a lot of urgency at the moment, you know, in terms of, we feel a lot of urgency, there's also this, we need to be methodical, we need to design things properly, we need to plan for the future, and a movement of resistance is an intergenerational one, and it takes generations to build up a real solid movement, cultural resistance. And why do I think it's really important now? Why do, you know, we've actually talked a lot with my colleagues about, let's do this conference years and years ago. So, and this came from 30 years of seeing horizontal hostility split up progressive movements all over the place, you know, in my own projects, in colleagues' projects. I've seen the stories repeat with nauseating regularity, and they're really horrendous. And I think, and what's horrible is that people don't talk about them because we blame ourselves. Often we blame ourselves for the misfortunes that happen to us. And it's only when you start talking to other colleagues and they come up with the same stories over and over again, you think, wow, it's not me then. This is happening to everybody. That, you know, we can pull the threads together and actually see it as a design issue. See, I'm a designer. I'm interested in how these things are designed, the mechanics of these things. But what prompted me to just say, okay, we're doing it now, this is really important, is because things are getting more urgent, and so things are getting more vicious for the people who are the most effective. So I'll give you 3 examples of some very vicious attacks that, although I had seen some pretty vicious stuff, really shocked me. They're really like, okay, this has got to stop, we've got to do something. And one is, and I'll just give some example, but one is Leora Keith, who's been very, very active, a very radical feminist, a brilliant thinker. She's an author. She's an ex-vegan who became very ill from being vegan from very young. And then she did lots of, you know, to save her life and her health, she did lots of investigation and actually made a lot of connections. Being a brilliant woman, you know, brilliant system thinker, she actually put together how agriculture is actually, you know, totally connected to capitalism, which every feminist knows. But then she connected that to her own health and to how, you know, she'd been totally bought into this veganism thing as a way of saving the world. And then she realized that it's, you know, it's, in fact, agriculture is at the bottom of a lot of the things that are going wrong. And she put this out in a very rational way, in a very compassionate way. You know, she went to great pains to express that, you know, the values that made her vegan are still her values, and she still totally respects those values in other people, but we have to look at the mechanics of this a lot better. And the attacks on her have been horrendously vicious, to the point where some vegans have decided to attack her physically. They got these cream pies and they actually threw pies on her face to humiliate her, basically, but pies full of like pepper, so that her eyes would be injured. And this is a disabled woman, you know, she often has to go around with a stick because these neurological problems that she got from being vegan for 20 years actually damaged her body irreparably. You know, she has disease, and that's why she's a campaigner about this. She doesn't want this to happen to other people, to other young people. So she has to go around with a stick. She's not exactly like strong, and she gets attacked by these 3 or 4 men, and then they put videos of that. You know, they filmed it just to make her, you know, to ridicule her and to humiliate her in public. They put these videos on YouTube and advertise them. And now she has to go around with bodyguards. Okay, and why? Because of her ideas. So in fact, they ended up proving her point, because one of the reasons that she says, you know, the veganism thing actually affects your mind, your brain. You know, you become mentally imbalanced. So, you know, like these people have just proved her right. When you resort to these things, and this is the difference between debate. You know, this is an extreme example, obviously, but there's all sorts of, you know, kind of grades of this. When you become personal, when you start attacking the person or the personality, when you stop talking about principles and you start talking about personalities, you've lost the plot. You know, it's like you're showing you don't have an argument really, and this is very, very, very common. Horizontal hostility plays on kind of playground violence. Yes, what we learn from bullying in schools, and often it looks very similar. And this is an example. And I was really shocked about this and just like discussed it. The other thing was DGR, Deep Green Resistance, who's a fairly new movement, came out of this book that was very thoroughly researched about what worked in resistance movements of the past that have changed society and what didn't. And they came up with a strategy. One of the best, I call it like, a manual on designing a revolution, because it's very credible, it's very well researched and based in fact. The attacks on DGR have been horrendous. Again, not really arguing the main points. They've picked on, attacks are often, you either pick on money, sex, gender, things that are kind of already emotive issues for people. And then you play on those, okay? That's one of the patterns that you see. So with DGR, what's really striking is that they picked on one episode, a particular episode around transgender, because of their radical feminist politics. They say gender is not natural, if you like. Gender is a given. Male and female is natural, but gender is a construct, and we want to eliminate gender. So then they got into political debates with transgender people that made it into a big emotional issue. That DGR is oppressing transgender people, which is nothing of what they're actually saying. They've never oppressed anybody, or in fact, they've actually had physical violence threats from the people who claim to have been oppressed by them. But anyway, this completely got out of hand, and to the point where the prejudice got so, when you start repeating prejudice so much, it kind of feels true to people, because, oh, if you heard it so much, it must be true, when you haven't actually looked at the arguments. To the point where, and this was about, that was shocking to me, about 36 environmental organizations actually signed a letter or a statement condemning DGR. And this was like horrendous to me. It was like, what? You actually put energy into putting down another organization, basically because they're too radical for you. What I didn't realize is that this actually gave DGR a lot more credibility. I joined them after this because I realized, okay, here are some really radical, amazing people being attacked, and let's go and support them. And other people did this. So now DGR is full of very deep thinking, very intelligent people who are not afraid of to stand up for ideals. So again, it backfired. Like, a lot of these things do backfire, but there's still, people are in a minority. Another, more recently, the story of Anita Sarkeesian. Again, amazing thinker, way ahead of her time. She decided, she's a radical feminist who decided to look into publicly, look into games, the gaming culture and the misogyny in gaming culture, how women are portrayed. And she found just enormous amounts of violence. And she denounced it. And this really annoyed a lot of the gaming community, mostly the men, obviously, like, who really became vicious, to the point that they brilliantly proved her point by creating games. What they started doing, instead of arguing her points on, openly, which they could have done, there's plenty of forums where you could do that, they actually created games where you could go and beat up Anita. So you could bash her face in, cut her up, and give her black eyes and kill her as a game. Okay. Then she had, more recently, she had rape threats and threats to her family safety. So she had to move house and get extra security. You know, so again, like with Vera, these stupid people ended up proving her point. But the interesting thing, the horrendous thing, is the violence, you know, the extremes of violence. But it's all part of the spectrum of horizontal hostility. These are not the authorities and the governments and the people who really have power. These are people that are in the 99% with us who should be, you know, but they're responding like marionettes of the system by emotionally being triggered into doing exactly what these people are denouncing. So there's this famous quote by Albert Einstein: great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds. And that's the pattern I see. Okay, these are just brilliant people. They're not just brilliant in their thinking, they're very clear, they're very confident. Okay, this is particularly offensive if you're a woman to be confident and outspoken and so clear about things when they're so anti-system. But basically what we're creating by condoning or not changing this culture of horizontal oppression is creating this massacre of dialogue and of brilliant people's lives. You know, these people's lives are being enslaved by stupidity, yeah, and by this, you know, horizontal hostility. But we're massacring dialogue. We're massacring, you know, collective intelligence functioning by these things. And it happens at all sorts of levels. Here I'm just giving some extremes because these are part of the reasons we said, okay, it makes sense that when the system is dying, in the throes of dying, the attacks are going to get vicious for a while, you know, and they've always been vicious. I mean, you know, we've always had martyrs to the causes of, but yeah, I just found these particularly shocking, and there's more, and I think it is us. We're doing it to each other and to ourselves, and it's really important that we educate people on this subject. So that's one of the reasons behind this conference. So we learn to analyze world events so we can respond appropriately. Now this is about, you know, this picture is about climate change, and again, you know, now that things are getting more heated in lots of ways, more people are getting conscious. There's a massive majority of people who do want things to change, but they're not so clear on how and where they can help. But there are people who are very clear, and they've been, and it really merits studying. You know, we need to catch up with all the work that people have done for decades, like these brilliant people who are getting attacked. And one of them, and to see the patterns, okay? So one of them is Naomi Wolf, and it's just one example. I've picked it because she actually predicts, and she says, you know, horizontal hostility is right there as one point. But in the step that she actually summarizes it as 10 steps from democracy to fascism. One scary pattern that we see in history is that a democracy, a very healthy functioning democracy, can turn into fascism within years, not decades, years. Very quickly. Even, you know, some of the last steps can happen in months. And before you realize it, you just don't have any rights to fight it. You know, you have to, you know, resort to underground tactics and basically dissenters being killed. So that can happen, okay? So she's saying don't get, you know, too comfortable with, oh, this could never happen here. She's saying all these 10 points are actually happening in America, in the United States. And the first step is invoke a terrifying internal and external enemy. That's what I was saying about, we're actually wired from the school system and the education system and the propaganda machine. We already have the viruses of mistrusting each other and looking for the internal enemy. But this is then stimulated and played on when it's convenient to keep us quiet, to keep us compliant, and to keep us fighting each other. So, you know, the fascists in Italy and Germany in the before the world wars, they, you know, ostracized the Jews, the gypsies, the homosexuals, and disabled people. So these were the problem. These were presented as the problem. And in fact, the problem was capital. It was a huge economic crisis, which is what's happening now. And so these are tactics that if we're not if we don't have our eyes opened, they tend to take out the most, precisely the people that are the most dangerous for the system, which are our best allies. Okay, so the people who can see these patterns are the ones that get taken out. So it wasn't a coincidence that the Jews were really picked on. They were amongst the most educated, brilliant people in Germany at the time. So they were the most dangerous. So this is all part of the history of horizontal hostility and how it expresses. And it's a complex picture, but I'm just giving some very quick kind of glimpses that hopefully we'll just explore during this month conference. This is a picture of what we should be aiming for, I think. And these stars, this nucleus joined up by lots of connections. So we construct, expand, and strengthen our organizations for the fight against capital. We have to unite. We have to create these organs for the new society, if we want a new society. So I would summarize it as a designer, as an integral permaculture designer, I would summarize this as we need to be designing stronger planetary chaotic structures. Chaotic structures are basically how organisms, from our own body to complex ecosystems are organized. There's lots of elements who have their own lives, have an independent functions and lives, but they're connected to all the others by protocols, by very clear protocols, which in an ecosystem, for example, they're just the laws of nature. But we can reproduce this design. Permaculture is it's mainly about trying to spot nature's designs and copying them. And to the extent we understand them, we're successful in that. And this is a very good pattern. It comes up over and over again. But, it was a person who designed organizations who actually came up with this word. Chaotic basically means between chaos and order. So flexible, dynamic. Also, and there's lots of names for this and lots of facets of it, depending on which world you live, kind of work in. But designing for more participatory democracy instead of, move from representative democracy, which is what we've had, to participatory democracy, which we can do now because of the technologies we have. And basically, and also there's a lot of wonderful work being done in collective intelligence. How you design for collective intelligence, what is it, and how it works, the mechanics. And one of the people is Jean-François Noubel, and he talks about holomidal collective intelligence as opposed to pyramidal, which is what the multinationals work on. The way we've organized lots of people and big projects and civilized humans has been with pyramidal intelligence, which is the best we could do at that scale. But now holomidal comes from holons, and because we have internet, because we have a way of communicating very quickly, and lots of calculating capacity, we could move and actually consciously design something very similar to an organism, to a body, lots of cells collaborating because we know what the others are doing. So that is what we should be aiming for. Okay, this is a design project. It's which is to connect. But what we see is, for example, in Spain, we have the transition movement is totally separate from the decrecimiento movement, the degrowth movement, which actually was here before. The transition movement was brought in 99% exactly the same work. They have their own conferences, their own meetings, massive resources gone into two different things. And there's lots more. I mean, there's the Venus Project, and we're doing similar things. They have a different politics, but, a lot of it is in common. Then there's the complementary currencies movement, there's the permaculture movement, there's the solidarity economics movement. All of these are separate. We've tried actually for many years, and one of our speakers talks about this, to join them up, also using the excuse, if you like, or the extra reason. The separation is the online and offline. But basically, all these conferences where people meet are very, very exclusive. Only a tiny, tiny percentage of people can go. So they're just for the privilege. They're creating another pyramidal kind of intelligence, if you like. And we want to push it to holomidal, to let's be more inclusive, but we need imagination. We need to design for this. We need to do some interesting new things. Massive resistance. to this. At the same time, what we see is, I'm an eco-village pioneer, we're creating a village. I know other people are creating villages or eco-builders, in the sense that they're creating all sorts of other projects, permaculture projects, ecological projects. The attacks that we're under are really vicious and really stupid and continuous. And we see patterns in this. And this is another expression of horizontal hostility. And even what's most striking and most sad, perhaps, is the eco-educators, the people who are, supposedly educating the next generation to change all this, they're not cooperating either. So horizontal hostility, and this makes perfect sense in a capitalist economy. We're trained to be frightened, to be in competition, to not cooperate. But even the people who talk about cooperation aren't doing it, and that's that needs to be looked at honestly. Okay, but it's not a terrible picture. There is a lot of intelligence happening and trying to happen, and that's what we also want to put out there. And we begin to understand any phenomenon by learning its history. The interesting thing, however, is that history, there's a good saying that history is written by the conquerors, by the the people who win. The colonizers are the ones that write the history book, right? And who designed the education system. But if you look, there's lots of different histories being written, and there's some very interesting histories being written by artists, people who have the imagination to kind of look at it in a different way. And one of them is Nori Huddle, who is one of our speakers. She's an activist. She's been an activist since she was 6. She discovered she was an environmental activist when she was 6, and she saw the first, destruction in the environment. She's an author, a very prolific author, and one of our speakers. And she's great because she's actually bilingual. So she speaks, well, she's multilingual actually, but she did the conference in Spanish and in English. She's actually she's setting up an eco-village in Ecuador. So we often speak about our eco-village experiences. And that's where we saw a lot of these patterns. Say, my God, that happened to you? Almost exactly the same thing happened to me. And this is in one of our talks. But anyway, like one of the most striking experiences of horizontal hostility she had was from this story that she wrote, which then was copied and appropriated by people who never even gave her, nodding gratitude, never even referenced her as the author of the story. They actually appropriated the story and made out that it was them who invented it. Which is, another way of completely disrespecting activists and our colleagues. It's not recognizing them for their work. And this is all ego stuff. Okay, this is how our personal stuff gets mixed up with our feelings, and personal agendas get mixed up without us even realizing, with our integrity, jeopardize our integrity. But anyway, the butterfly tale. It's called, the book is Butterfly: A Tiny Tale of Great Transformation, is this story, which you probably have heard of, but I'll go through very quickly, which is a great, the brilliance of Nori was to take this biological story. It's actually what actually happens in biology, from, a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, but she saw in it a metaphor for our times, a story of our times. And the caterpillar is this voracious animal that just like, well, if you got, like, I have bushes for butterflies, we especially grow for butterflies, and they get decimated. They're really voracious buggers, they just take it out completely. It's a miracle they grow again. The monarch butterflies, we try to get their plants, and they can only eat a particular bush, so they just decimate it. They get fat and fat and fat, and then they go into a chrysalis. Now, what happens in the chrysalis is fascinating, because biologically, the caterpillar actually breaks down into a kind of caterpillar soup, and the cells are all mixed up, and these imaginal cells start to appear. The imaginal cells are the ones that know that they have the DNA or the code of the butterfly, but they're actually an enemy to the caterpillar, which is still the dominant creature. And so this organism kills the imaginal cells, but more imaginal cells keep growing, and they get killed until so many imaginal cells appears that they start to agglutinate and start creating the tissues that create the organs of the butterfly. And then the butterfly starts to form. And what Nore was saying is that in these times of chaos and confusion and strife, we're probably, you could see that you could imagine that our society and humanity is in this butterfly phase. You know, this caterpillar, you know, we've had this caterpillar phase of just consuming and eroding. And now we're going into this chrysalis, and we need to be patient and understand how to create this butterfly. And the imaginal cells are the people, they're the activists, they're the people who have the new code, if you like, you know, who have the vision of how society can be. They have the butterfly vision. But they're being killed off. They've been killed off for many decades by the old system that just doesn't want to thrive. But the lesson for activists and people who are wanting the new society is get together with other activists. Don't be surprised at the violence. You know, you're part of the new code, but you need to get together with other activists and get that support. So it's a beautiful story. So it's a way of looking at history, okay? It's a completely artistic way of looking at history, if you like, or biological one. And this is a representation of these imaginal cells, these magical imaginal cells, which now what's interesting is Max Wilbert, who's also an activist, also an author, and also one of our speakers. He's a very young activist, been very experienced. He's also a filmmaker, and he does great documentaries. At least recently he's done one on climate change and the con of renewables. One of his articles, he says, one of the most important tasks, our most important tasks now, is building a culture of resistance. Now, what's a culture of resistance? Well, a culture of resistance are important for many reasons. Here are a few. They support radical views that are unpopular in the general culture. Now, we talk about, even people talk about a lot about paradigm change, don't seem to realize that, you know, when you're changing paradigms, the first ideas are very unpopular. You know, you don't judge ideas by how popular they are. In fact, you judge them by how unpopular they are. That would be one of the signals of it being a new radical idea of a new system. They're not popular. So a cultural resistance supports radical views, okay, doesn't kill them off. They aid in training and development of resistors. Now, the resistors are the people who are most courageous, if you like, and have more conviction in changing. And they need to be supported. They lead to the creation of revolution in community organizations. These are like the cells getting together and creating the tissues and the organs, okay? The revolutionary community organizations are the organs of the new society. They allow people with different levels of engagement in political struggle to support a movement. Now, this says, which is really important, you know, cultural resistance doesn't mean everybody's a resistor, everybody's an activist, everybody has to put their lives on the line. In fact, what DGR, the book, has been very good at documenting is that, in fact, it's only ever a tiny minority of the people who take these risks, these personal risks, when the resistance work. The others, however, support them. You know, so, you know, somebody who's, you know, breeding children, for goodness sake, or looking after elderly, or creating the food for a society, they're not necessarily going to be the activists in terms of, like, you know, taking up the struggle and risking their lives. But they need to at least not fight against these minorities that are supporting their livelihoods as well. Yeah, they're supporting them in getting, you know, they're supporting their children in having a better society to live in. So it's about having the variety, you know, like in this butterfly organism, there's lots of different types of organs, there's lots of different types of cells, but they cooperate. Okay, they don't fight each other. That's why they can fly. They create space for dialogue on important subjects. That's the thing. There's a big, huge difference between horizontal hostility and debate. Healthy debate is important. We need the space for even passionate dialogue, especially passionate dialogues, because we need to process all these big ideas. So cultural resistance creates that space, facilitates that space where people can feel safe to play with dangerous ideas, dangerous in the sense that they're new, they're not, you know, conventional. and they serve as the fertile soil from which effective resistance movement can grow. Now, soil or culture, in fact, in biology, when you make a culture for cells to grow in, and it needs to have the nutrients and a particular temperature, and something that will support these cells. So what he's talking about is another way of saying a culture for imaginal cells or activists thrive in, because when the activists are just the most vulnerable, if you like, once they can grow, everybody else grows well too, because the activists are just making way for this new society. Now, there's obviously a personal component in this as well. That's why we talk about integral, because it plays out in all quadrants, if you like, the external, the internal, the collective, and the individual. One of the things I love about Stephanie's drawing, she has a lot of caterpillars and butterflies in her stories, her drawings. And this one says, constructive struggles moves us forward ideologically. Without it, we don't learn. And one thing that's very much out there in the conventional culture, in the dominant culture, is that comfort above all things. Consumerism is built around be comfortable, be happy. That's the utmost value. The most important thing is that you're happy. This is the old paradigm, and this is a very immature way of looking at things. Now, the pyramid on the right is actually a natural succession, as we would say in permaculture design, or a line of development. It maps the lines of development of moral and psychological maturity. Now, and basically, when you're an infant, you're at the bottom, and when you're an adult and a mature citizen, you're at the top. Okay, you have more of the top characteristics. So adult, psychologically and morally mature humans are courageous. They're able to commit to their own freely chosen principles. That's why at the top of the pyramid it says principles. These are people, that we're morally, we're mature psychologically and ethically and morally mature when we're driven by principle, not by fear. See, children, when we start as immature humans, and this is normal, this is fine at that stage, we teach children, to not do, not do bad things, because otherwise they'll be punished. Or, whether punishment is like, we're going to disapprove of them, whatever. So like, don't torture that insect and take the legs off the fly, because that's really horrible thing to do and I don't approve. And then it's self-interest, it's like, I'm going to get rewarded, or I'm going to be seen as a good child, or a good boy attitude is the next one up. Law and order morality, okay, that I don't do this because it's illegal. And then I don't question whether my values, I don't have any values apart from it's illegal. So that's the law and order morality. But after that is social contract. It's like, what is good for society, for my agreement with my peers? And that could go above law and morality. The law, I could do something illegal because my social contract is more important, like what's good for my community. But people driven by principle, they don't need any of the other stuff. They're just driven by principle. So they will do legal or illegal things that are in the social contract or not, because, but the clarity comes from principle, okay? Now, what's interesting about this is the dominant consumerist culture actually pulls us strongly downwards, down this spiral, to stay immature, to stay frightened, to stay indecisive, and to stay egotistical. And that is where horizontal hostility ultimately comes from, okay? A lot of horizontal hostility played out in projects and stuff looks very much like playground bullying at a different scale. It's just bullies as adults. So it looks, it looks the same shape, but it's got different ingredients and different colors. But basically that's one of the patterns that you can see, but it's actually a moral development issue. Now, what drives us up this growth, growing as mature, morally mature people? Well, one thing is consciousness, is being aware, self-aware, so it is education. It's, our parents telling us this is wrong and this is right and why, and reasoning with us. It's reading books, is developing empathy with other people. But there's another part, which is basically courage and integrity. We have to want to apply that knowledge and that consciousness and actually do it, which is a totally different thing. You know, I can be conscious that it's really terrible that they're bullying this person next to me on the tube. But if I don't have the courage and the willingness to actually do anything and say something, I will never develop that capacity to be driven and, you know, to be able to commit and to my chosen principles. I just won't have the capacity. It's like a muscle that we need to exercise. And we can exercise it by noticing and defending people when we see horizontal hostility happening in our groups. Okay, this is a very frequent way that you can be called to say something, to actually have the courage to just even say something, and not to, you know, this good boy attitude thing. You see it when people, like, they know it's wrong, they feel terrible, but they just don't have the courage to say anything because they look bad. All that's going to happen today is going to look bad to some people, and so they don't do it. Okay, we do those acts of cowardliness every day. I do them, you know. I'm saying we because I do them too. But we need to be aware of them. That's why I want to raise consciousness in these things. It's like they really don't serve us, and they certainly don't serve the change we need to create. So that's one thing. But what's really interesting, although we're in a society still dominated by sheeple, you know, this great expression, like, you know, sheeple, the human spirit is so strong and so vibrant and so wants to have it all, you know. And I see this as an expression of this, the fact that what's very interesting about our current cultural confusion about activists is that we flock to movies full of heroes who are passionate fighters for justice, whom we admire and cheer on screen, but then in our own real life, we don't even recognize them, or we misunderstand them, or we even fight or damage them. And this is from Avatar, which is a very popular movie, and that's one of the great things about it. You know, it's very much a myth, you know, a story of our times, of a planet being destroyed by capitalism, by greed, and by interest in money going over life. And the native people, the people who have the integrity, who are close to the soil, who are connected to nature, fighting for their lives to get rid of this, you know, beast. But there's lots of movies like this, and one of the first ones, you know, one of the oldest ones, very, very popular, still I think one of the most popular movies of all time, is Star Wars. And I've got in one of the articles I've wrote more recently about the culture of non-resistance, of non-violence, which is a really interesting myth of our times. I've got this. I found this picture of Lucas Skywalker with "terrorist" written in front of it. You know, because we love these movies. You know, they're very, very popular for a reason, and they're even popular with people I know are activists, but are actually against. They're really adamant that you must never use any kind of violence, and they would see this as violence. You know, but what's interesting is if you look at the pattern. Well, one is important to Rose is fighting for justice requires coherence. And that is why these people are heroic. They have very strong coherence, integrity. And this is how, in more detail, you know, the integrity is expressed like this. They passionately care for life and justice. Much more than themselves, their individual selves, they care for justice and life. They're very clear about what's right and what's wrong. And if you look in our culture at the moment, in the New Age movement, there's a lot to answer for this. There's even this thing about, oh, there's no right and no wrong. I think, who is saying this? Whose interest is it to say this? You know, where does that message come from? You know, where does that mythology come from? It is kind of true in a very high level, kind of spiritual level, maybe, but, you know, it confuses a lot of people because you have to have the emotional maturity to apply that. So yes, hell, there is right and wrong, you know, oppression is wrong. And that's why we are attracted to these heroes, because they're very clear about that. They don't have all these existential doubts about, oh, you know, maybe it's all okay anyway. They know who the enemy is. Often what's interesting, however, is that in the movies, part of the plot, sometimes a big part of the plot, is figuring out, is that when they realize, you know, it's about them maturing as activists, and they realize you know, that their friend is actually an enemy and their enemy is actually a friend. You know, sometimes there's that subplot, but they're clear about it eventually. They display great intelligence and creativity in choosing effective strategies. They're very good strategists. Okay, they have to be very clever at tricking and, you know, doing the right thing, because they're usually in a minority. Yeah, so when you're in a minority, you have to be a very good strategist. So often they take on much bigger firepower than they have, like in this case in Avatar, as well as enormous courage. Courage is a massive quality that comes up again and again. They do these incredibly frightening things. They're frightened, but they do them. Because they're committed to doing whatever needs to be done to stop the oppressors from destroying more of what they love. Okay, so they've seen the destruction, they've suffered the destruction, and they get over their grief, and they use their anger to actually expel this destroyer. And although they blow up plenty of things and even kill people on the way, I mean, these films are incredibly violent, you know, they're really like horrendous in terms of like, and you know, and it's not all from the baddies, yeah. But it's very clear that they're driven by love, not hate. Okay, they're very much driven by love. So these are the models that we have in our culture, which are really interesting. And there's more, you know, and I think these are all part of the hopeful thing. I think they're all part of our, if you like, eros inside us, who knows that this is who we want to be, you know. So apart from all these Shiro films, we have some useful popular mythologies, and that's why I found this hilarious. And I don't know if it's an in-joke with the director, but that, you know, there's this indigo adults mythology, which has come from the New Age movement. But, you know, it's this story about, and these you know, in this film, they're all indigo colored. They're literally indigo people, the fighters. But the indigo adults, or the indigo children, are supposed to be like this new generation of people, this new kinds of people who are very brave. You know, they've got tough skins. They've come here to break up the old system, to break up the old institutions. They have very low tolerance for injustice, very low tolerance for stupidity. They're brave. They're controversial, and yeah, this mythology says they're good, you know, they're on our side. They've come to, but even what I've noticed, even people who love this story, then they don't recognize them around them. Some people who never said boo to a goose and are very difficult, you know, very unlikely to do anything controversial, actually think they are indigo adults, even though they have this long list and they don't, you know, they only fit like 2 or 3 of them. You know, they're actually some of the problem. You know, the people who are fighting, people who really are indigo adults by those descriptions. But there's another way of saying these imaginal selves, you know, that these different people. And in horizontal hostility, it's always the different people that get attacked. Okay, that's why it's important. That's why I keep going on about activists and different people. Activists are just people who, my definition is, you know, not just that they're active, they actually do frightening things. They get over their fear. They do controversial things. They do difficult things. Okay? So although we say that, you know, activism is also signing petitions, I wouldn't, that's a very mild form of activism. You're not risking anything by signing a petition, but you are risking something by standing up against bullies. You know, you are risking something by you're creating a petition, you know, and getting thousands of people to sign it, because then you're dangerous and you will get attacked, or you're putting yourself in danger, and that requires courage. Okay, so what's great and what's positive is we have all these role models, and it's just, you know, jumping that divide between you know, knowing it and doing it. And you don't even have to do it. I keep repeating this, is a lot of the people we've interviewed who are activists, they've got attacked. But, you know, we don't require everybody to do the work they're doing. Just to stop the attacks is enough, because then these people can do their bloody work. Okay? So in this film, even, you know, the warriors who went out there, you know, these ones riding dragons here, they're a tiny minority of their village. You know, they're only the young and fit and, you know, angry. The others, you know, the parents, the mothers, the elderly, the nurturers are home. They're being defended. Okay, so this is what we're saying, is like, all we need to do in a cultural in creating a cultural resistance is let the resistors do their work. Just don't get in their way. Support them. You don't have to be them. But you certainly, what I think happens a lot is we're envious of them. We're envious of people who are this passionate. We're envious of people, especially if we're shut down. That's why it's important to we also work on this personal development things, anything you want. If you're jealous of something, it's because you want something but you're not prepared to work for it, or you don't think you have the resources. So yes, you can, and it's just you need to work at it. But then we have this culture saying, oh, don't work at anything, you can just buy a product and you'll be happy. So it's just putting the consciousness together with action. What's really fascinating, and what another thing that activists have to navigate, and horizontal hostility in itself is full of contradictions. And in this, it took me a while to get my brain around this drawing of Stephanie's, was contradiction is a guide to practice. I was like, what's that mean? And then I thought, of course, it makes perfect sense, because there's a lot of talk about change of paradigm, right? Well, a paradigm changes when the contradictions become too great and or evident. But not only that, there are enough clear-minded activists organizing effectively to bring in the new paradigm, okay? And these are the people who get attacked. So, and one of the things I love this picture because it's very simple. Although it's not this simplistic, it's actually something to do with this. Is the paradigm between ego and eco. They're very different paradigms. Now, ego is this pyramidal intelligence. We've built up the multinationals and man on top, not just male man, but humans. It's totally anthropocentric. And that goes into everything. We express it in zillions of ways that we don't even realize. And so when you even consciously want to be more eco-minded, we still drag behind us this egocentrism and anthropocentrism. It's me, the human, if it's not me, the person. So there are contradictions. And one of the things that happened recently is somebody wanted to come to a project, and then they couldn't because we realized they didn't quite fit. After telling us how wonderful it was and how lovely it was and how much we wanted to be part of it, as soon as they realized we didn't really have a space for them, they started saying, oh yeah, but we see a lot of contradictions in what you say on your web and what you said to us. There's a lot of contradictions. And we thought, well, the contradictions are exactly why we need to be careful who we have here, because we're living in a lot of contradictions, because we are doing a new system, a new way of thinking within the culture who doesn't. But the conflict isn't in ourselves, it's actually between us and these other people. We have a lot of conflict, having lived in the country and supporting ourselves with food and stuff like that. There's a lot of conflict with city people, for example, and often that's seen as a hostile thing, and it's not. We just have a different way of thinking, a different way of doing things, and people react emotionally to that. And then it becomes a hostile thing. And so a lot of, it's basically these contradictions that create the hostility. And they're the contradictions that are quite natural when you change from one paradigm to another. Oh yeah, a big contradiction. I mean, there's so many contradictions I've seen people, for example, that, they want to come and be part of a permaculture project or an eco-village, but they're dragging around these old things like, they want to create the structures of a new society, but they spend all their money on transport, on airlines to go visit places. And then when you ask them to pay rent in an eco-village, they say, what? But I want to be a volunteer. And they spend 90%, they're richer than us in terms of loose money, and they spend it all on the airlines. And that's a massive contradiction. And then they get very angry when you point that out. And you say, look, fine, but, don't ask us to host you here if we know that, you're giving most of your power to our enemies, the things we don't want to support. And another thing is going looking for thrills, not having the courage to stand up for better ideals, for more dangerous ideals, if you like, the new ones, and then looking for thrills in things like bungee jumping and fairs and, you know, doing gratuitously dangerous things instead of the dangerous things that actually life is calling us to do. You know, we need to do a lot of brave things to stop the cruelty that's happening now, the violence that's happening now. You know, 20,000 children dying every day of starvation in the world. It takes a lot of courage to repair, to change. You know, 200 species dying, you know, being extinguished a day. That requires a lot of courage for us to stop that. But because we're so confused and because we're so in contradiction with ourselves, you know, we don't actually take on that challenge. But still, the human spirit requires us to do dangerous things, and we go looking for them, because you're literally dead if you're not challenging yourself in some way. So I hope that these bungee jumping things actually help people get more brave with more useful things, but sometimes I don't. Anyway, this is about contradictions. And I love this post there. It says, "We are the granddaughters of all the witches you were never able to burn." Because there's a culture of horizontal hostility which has been bred. It's been bred in us. You know, this fear and this mistrust of others and this hatred seeping sideways instead of being turned into healthy anger that is there to make us change things. It goes way back. It's a strategy that's been used by the powerful, by the 1%, to keep the 99% down forever in our civilized cultures. It's basically a definition of civilized culture is a class culture. It's a class society. Now, you know, fascism is one thing I mentioned, and that very much uses horizontal hostility to work. But, you know, what happens then we have this fear in our bodies almost, you know. So there's a lot of talk about how, you know, the burning of the witches was actually the beginning of capitalism, of a new stage of capitalism in Western society, in Western culture. And it did away with precisely the people that were most threatening, precisely the most intelligent, educated, leader kind of people. And it was designed to frighten them, to frighten us into being sheep. So, you know, it kind of, the fear builds on ancient fear. And that's why it's important to, you know, to know our history. And I love to say, you know, if you don't know our history, we're doomed to repeat it. You know, the burning of the witches was only possible because of horizontal hostility, but it was provoked. Yeah, it was installed. It's not that it's natural in us. It's installed and it's reinstalled, and you know, and it has to be reinstalled because it's not our nature, you know, to do this, but it's very much the nature of the system which infects us. So we found some of these witches, these activists, and it's not a coincidence that they're mostly women and that the examples I gave are women. There's this saying, there's actually somebody else who said recently, the world is going to be saved by the Western woman, and by that he meant it's the Dalai Lama. She said that. By that he meant the Western woman, not because we're any special, or because we have all these privileges that, you know, third world women don't have, and we still have the mentality of the one, the oppression has marked us to the you know, in a way that we can see the oppression. See, the oppressed are always the ones who can see better how the belly of the beast works. And Vandana Shiva has said more recently, we are either going to have a future where women lead the way to make peace with the earth, or we are not going to have a human future at all. So the reason women are particularly, you know, women leaders are particularly oppressed is because they're the most dangerous. And these people that we found for this conference, they're either women or they're feminist men, because it's an important issue. You know, the liberation of all oppressed groups is an important, crucial issue for new society. So Derek Jensen is brilliant on this. He's a wonderful author. He's been called like the poet of the environmental movement. But his incredibly deep compassion comes from his background as having been an abused child and in an abusive family with a, and he talks about that very candidly. So he understands oppression because he's lived it. So he has empathy, which is where his politics come from. And then he's an incredibly intelligent man who's put all this together and can make sense of it for other people. And he's wonderful to listen to. And I was very curious to hear about, because he, the quote that we have is about horizontal hostility, and he knows it very much because he's also one of the founders of DGR, and he's seen it, what's happened, but also in other things. He's been a political activist for ages, and he's one of the first people. He will talk tomorrow. He will. We've recorded the interview, and Almo Gonzalez is going to do the one in Spanish. She's an integral coach and a brilliant woman who's worked actually in the conventional business culture, if you like, more than the alternative, but recently coming to the alternative culture, because she took on a family farm and decided to be a permaculture designer and to create an kind of permaculture project. She was really shocked to see the horizontal hostility in the environmental movement. So she's going to talk about that in relation to money, and who we pay, who we support with our money, especially with money being such a emotional issue. Then Heloisa Primavera is actually one of our bilingual speakers. She's going to talk. She's done the same interview in English and in Spanish, and she will point out more the part of facilitation, how a way of avoiding or minimizing horizontal hostility is to have good, well facilitated groups, okay, where conflict isn't so easy to rise. So she's lived in she's worked in communities, and she's a social a professor of sociology and also system thinker, and was very involved in South America in the complementary currencies movement. Max Wilbert I've mentioned already, and he's also in his young activist life, he's come across horizontal oppression enough to tell us about it. Nori Huddle, I've already spoken about, and she's also given us a bilingual, her experience in both languages. Rachel Ivey is another very young, very experienced radical feminist activist who has seen a lot of, personally lived a lot of horizontal hostility and has some very interesting things to say about it. And Jose Zamora, again, very young, but has seen a lot of the ugly belly of the beast in terms of being an activist. And Pepa Rodriguez, who's a colleague who has been instrumental in this, trying to unify all these different movements here in Spain, for example, transition and the Crecimiento movement and complementary currencies. And she's going to talk about that and what her experience has been and her theories on it, how she's lived it. So I'm really excited to have got these people, but we want especially these people to stimulate you in thinking about where you've seen stuff like this happen and tell us your stories, because the purpose of this conference is to collect lots of stories and then to see the patterns in them, to see if we can come up together with a good theory of how this happened, why it happens, and so how to stop it. Okay. So I love this saying by Stephanie. We make our convictions exist by practicing them in the real world. It's not just wishful thinking, we actually do them. And this last one I love as well. We learn from both study and practice. We neglect neither. Now, action learning, which is what we do in integral permaculture. Permaculture is best taught by action learning. You have to do things, but you also have to study. It's no point just reinventing the wheel and doing everything from practice. We stand on the, we're successful to the extent that we stand on the shoulders of giants. We have to understand their work, but also then apply it for ourselves and tweak the practice. This is called practice. So the whole purpose of this conference is that we are co-creating a great action study resource as an antivirus proposal to the disease of horizontal hostility. We want to eliminate it. We want it to be something that made us stronger, because horizontal hostility is a wonderful way of understanding how the system works, but not if we let it destroy us. So you can learn a lot from it, and we can, create an antivirus for it. And so we're going to give some of the theory, and we're going to, give texts and other people's experiences, but the way you really understand it is, what I mentioned before, is not just the knowledge, and awareness, is to practice courage, is to do things that you're a little frightened of, which are not attacking your colleagues. Okay, is to say your truth, where it's maybe embarrassing, or where maybe it's challenging. That's one of the things I said. It was difficult to do this conference. One, it was difficult to find people who were willing to talk about their failures in a way. Horizontal hostility are all failure stories, where we got attacked, because we all feel that until we hear lots of other stories, we all feel like, oh God, if I was a better person, this wouldn't have happened to me. It's part of the trick, part of how it works. So tell your story. Help writing articles. We want to write articles together and compiling, hopefully, lots of comments from the Facebook group, I hope. Interview someone. What I love is, in talking about this during the months that we've been preparing this, people have come up spontaneously and said, oh my God, I know exactly what you're talking about, because this guy I know who's got this farm, he's been doing amazing work for years and years, but people keep coming and going and nobody stays with him, and he's doing all this work and people keep saying that he's doing it wrong, and often that's a kind of, pioneer syndrome. People come, criticize, and then leave. Instead of actually supporting somebody, and we expect pioneers to be perfect, and all sorts of stuff like that happens. So we said, please interview him and get his story, because what happens often is the people who are culpable of horizontal hostility, we get to hear their stories all the time. We get to hear their gossip, and it expands. While the pioneers left to do the hard work, don't ever tell their story to anybody. They're just getting on with the work. Which is how the bad virus gets around instead of the good one. So we want to get the good one around, to propagate the other stories. Participate in the discussions, and even start the discussions. When you see this is a discussion we need to have, just start it. Okay, challenge yourself. Practice courage. Okay, and you can contribute in text, video, audio, or make art like Stephanie does. Stephanie McMillan does this wonderful art. And it just changes culture, it changes perception. You can do it in a humorous way too. So please, this is for studying, sharing, and acting differently. Be a model for others. And this is our Facebook group, and we hope to see your minds and ideas and videos or whatever you want to share there. Let's put it all together. Thank you very, very much for listening, and see you soon.